Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. Simon Rowell is a Victorian-based author with an eclectic working background. His first novel, The Echo of Others, was an Amazon bestseller and went on to be longlisted for the Ned Kelly Awards Best First Crime for 2018. This year, he returns with a brand new crime thriller, a book that is propulsive, filled with twists and turns, and a new and unforgettable crime-busting duo. Called The Long Game and released by Text Publishing, I'm delighted to welcome Simon to the podcast today. Hi, Simon.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Happy belated release day.
Thank you.
It only came out yesterday, so the 3rd of August here in Australia and in New Zealand, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Excellent. As I said before we started recording, this book was fantastic. It was a page turner and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it on so many levels. So Simon, for those tuning in, I wondered if you could tell me a little bit more about the book.
Okay, so the book's essentially about a homicide detective named Zoe Mayer, who's come back to work after 4 months off on medical leave, suffering from PTSD. And she's come back to work with a service dog by her side, a golden retriever named Harry. And the reason for her medical leave and the PTSD is sort of outlined throughout the book towards the building up towards the end. So that becomes clear. But her first case back is a fatal stabbing down in Portsea at the far end of the Mornington Peninsula. She and her partner go and investigate the case, and the suspect is soon arrested and charged. And although the evidence is really overwhelming, Zoe starts to believe that the whole thing may be some sort of stitch-up, some sort of criminal conspiracy that they can't really see yet. The trouble is that her colleagues and the prosecutors don't believe her, and they think she's still sort of suffering from PTSD, and that's affecting her judgment. But now someone's hunting her down as well, hunting Zoe down. The book is really sort of an action-driven mystery sort of set around a tough and clever investigator who doesn't give up. And I thank you for saying it's a page turner. It's good to hear.
Oh, absolutely. It kept me up. So, Simon, what inspired this particular story?
I was sitting in a cafe in Kyneton having lunch one day, and the plot sort of came to me as a bit of an inspiration just out of the blue. I grabbed a paper napkin and started jotting down the bare bones of the plot, and then 10 minutes later it was sort of basically done. So the character of Zoe, the character of Harry were really fully formed right then and there within 10 minutes, which was a bit of a strange experience. So I'm not sure if Zoe was really an inspiration or a decision. It was, some sort of in between. I was really conscious also about writing a story about a detective who happens to be female rather than a female detective story. And, that difference may seem like a subtle one, but it really isn't. I really have written Zoe as a solid professional detective who's got issues like everyone does, but I've left out sort of all these sort of irritating tropes that you could be writing into a female detective story. They're all sort of gone, and I've been really pleased with the feedback I've got from the publishers and also from advanced readers about the character. A lot of people actually said they want to be friends with her, go out for a drink or coffee with her, and everyone sort of loves Harry. So it's gone well. So I'm really pleased about how well it's been accepted. As opposed to writing a traditional sort of male detective, I think Zoe has much more of a nuanced and interesting character about her. She's just got more to give. She's got a few more barriers to jump over as well in terms of the office. She's come back to work with PTSD following this very serious police incident, which has sort of got some people loving her and some people really reviling her, and that really becomes clear why that is through the book.
And I want to touch on that a little bit more as we chat. But yeah, I was really intrigued by your decision to write a female detective character, and you've certainly done that in your first book as well, even though I haven't read your first book. So yeah. I wanted to ask you, what challenges, if any, did you encounter writing about Zoe's experiences as a detective sergeant?
Not too many, really. I as I said, I really wrote her as a person. That's really first and foremost, just wrote her as a person, and it came fairly easily to me to do that. I think the advantage of writing in the other gender is that, I don't really need to get hung up on people thinking that I'm writing about myself in disguise. There's been books, very, very famous books in the last, decade or so, where you read the description of the main character and it sort of sounds very much like the author. And I really didn't want that to happen. And having that sort of separation, I suppose, gives you a level of objectivity and a freedom. just to write it without people, about me worrying about what people are going to think it's about me. So, yeah.
From a procedural perspective, I found the story to be quite intriguing. And so I wanted to ask you, what research did you do, not only to get inside Zoe's head, but to bring her workplace activities to the page?
Okay. So I know a couple of police officers who I used to understand the nuances of police operation, also just the politics which go on mainly within squads. From a technical point of view, I lent a little bit on the film and TV office of the Victoria Police to answer certain questions that I had, some of which they could answer and some of which they couldn't because of operational concerns, quote unquote. But no, they were really helpful as well.
I really enjoyed Zoe as a character. She's tough, and I love that she didn't take any crap from her colleagues, a fact that was even more remarkable given that she was suffering PTSD and had only just returned to work. And it was so interesting for me to read about Harry and his role in Zoe's working life, because interestingly, yours was the second book in a week that I've read in which a character is suffering PTSD and has a service dog to assist.
Oh, there you go.
Unbelievable. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, do you think that this is commonplace or becoming more common for affected police personnel here in Australia?
Not as yet, but it probably should be. It's something that some members of Victoria Police have been fighting for a little while, but they haven't had a lot of success. So in that regard, it's pretty much fictional. Harry's role to Zoe is really as an emotional anchor when she's reacting to certain things. But as the story sort of progresses, Harry's reaction to witnesses and suspects becomes really telling. And Zoe realises that she can actually use the dog's instincts as a tool for her investigation. So he becomes a really important part of really solving the crime at the end. And Harry's character, I know very well because he's based on a golden retriever we had many years ago called Jackson, who was a very brave and loyal and loving dog, just like Harry is to Zoe. So writing Harry was pretty easy because that was really off-lived experience.
In my introduction, I called them the super crime busting duo because
good. I like that.
I mean, Zoe's instincts are pretty bang on as well. And so to have Harry backing her up in that regard just made her unstoppable, I think, in this story.
Yes. I mean, he becomes a very important part of, she's got a human partner as well called Charlie, but Harry is pretty much as important as Charlie to solving the crime in the end. Everyone's fallible within the book except for the dog. Some people are a bit overly emotive, some are a bit reckless. No one's perfect, which is sort of just the way life is, really. I mean, there's even clues within the book, or a major clue within the book as towards the motive that detectives even miss. And I've left that in there for the mystery lover to solve, really, because mystery lovers love mysteries. So I thought I'd leave a little Easter egg in there for the keen reader that they may see to actually work out what the motive is.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so the relationship between Zoe and her male colleagues was fascinating. You touched a bit on this a little earlier in one of your answers, but especially since the case that she's been assigned to investigate is the first after returning from her extended leave to deal with her trauma. The way that her male colleagues tiptoe around her and in many ways second guess her judgment on the investigation was frustrating for me as a reader. So I guess there are two issues I wanted to explore. One, was it because she was female? And two, was it a hangover from this culture within policing that anyone who suffers mental health issues is no longer fit for the job?
Both.
Yeah,
both. There's I know of some specific instances, in Victoria Police, who I've heard firsthand actually, of people being, bullied quite severely in different stations. Not necessarily people who are as senior as Zoe, but it definitely does happen. People in the past have been sort of just moved around and things like that. So she's obviously a very tough person, and that sort of wins out in the end. But the bullying is a bit systemic. That's changing, but these things, it's like turning a ship. It takes a little while and takes some concerted effort and good examples in the workplace as well. So she's tough, and she's going to win.
So she's also one of those detectives you want to have on your side. She's not interested in the quick arrests or easy solutions. She's interested in the truth and making sure that whatever case she builds is watertight. But not everyone around her is of the same opinion. Was this something you specifically wanted to address, and why?
I think it was really about building out her character. She is definitely in it for the right reasons. I mean, she believes in herself. She doesn't need to be sort of reassured. She's a detective sergeant. She's very brave. She's also a bit reckless at the same time. And that that is drawn out within the book as well. I haven't made her a perfect person, but she's on the right side of the argument generally always.
It's quite difficult for women, particularly in male-dominated roles, to back yourself the way that Zoe does. So it was actually really refreshing to see a character that does that.
I probably was lucky in regard to the fact that I grew up with a single mother with 3 kids who was working and toughing it out. So she probably had an effect on me in that regard as well, and as being a good role model. So she's probably part of my experience as well in a way.
I love the setting. We're talking coastal communities like Portsea and Sorrento, as you said, on the Mornington Peninsula, as well as Melbourne. So what drew you to set the book there?
I'd spent some time down there. It's an interesting area in the coastal community all through down the Mornington Peninsula. It's quite affluent generally along the bay there, right down to Portsea, and inland you get agricultural areas and winery sort of areas. It's not all rich and bright lights. It's other parts to it as well. So there's always a bit of darkness in any community, I suppose, if you look hard enough. But it's an interesting area to write about. I've got a sequel that I'm writing right now, which is set up in Echuca and Moama on the border there, and I'm planning to write a third book around Ballarat and the goldfields. So it's more interesting, I think, than writing about necessarily just writing about the suburbs, because you've got a lot more atmospherics and environment to write about.
Simon, as mentioned earlier, you have an eclectic working background. You've worked on oil rigs as a tour guide and managed nightclubs, just to name a few. So I guess that begs, I guess it begs the question, have you always wanted to be a writer?
When I was about 14, I decided I wanted to be a writer. I didn't write anything. I just wanted to be a writer. And I was talking to someone the other day about the fact that I think I like the idea of being a writer rather than much to do with the work of being a writer. I had that in the back of my mind, and I sort of thought, I need to learn some more experiences and go out and get some life experience behind me. So off I went and did a whole lot of interesting jobs especially when I was young. I went away to the oil fields when I was 15. About 3 years underage to go up there. I had a girlfriend whose father worked for the company, was a senior executive, and wanted to get me as far away from his daughter as possible. So he got me this job and put me on a small plane, and off I went. So that was good. It was a good experience. I built a water pipeline down from North or South Australia down to where Roxby Downs now is, and that was 3 months of work, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day for 3 months. I managed nightclubs, managed hotels. Went back to uni when I was 25, did a couple of degrees, and went to sort of business after that. So when I was about 47 or so, we had a bit of a tragedy in the family with stepbrother passing from cancer. Very young, just under 40, and that really spurred us to sort of make some changes, because we thought, well, if not now, when? We moved to the country, and I started writing a couple of years after that, and wrote my first book, The Echo of Others, and published that in the end of 2018, self-published it. I think the experiences of working in different places with different cultures and all sorts of things has been really important to give me that garden from which to pick information and ideas and experiences.
I always ask authors about writing tips on this podcast. So I wondered if you had any pearls of wisdom to offer the many aspiring writers who listen.
Oh, pearls of wisdom. The first is maybe that first drafts are always pretty average, if not worse. I think the idea of going and writing a chapter and then editing a chapter and then writing a second chapter and editing a second chapter would be problematic for me anyhow. I tend to just want to get it all down, get the first draft done, and then go back and start to really polish and refine it. So it's almost like the first draft is like the frame of the house rather than the finished house. The second is that I was listening to an author the other day, George Saunders, speaking about the fact that the type of writer you are and the kind of thing you write about is almost like predestined in a way. I write hard-boiled crime fiction, quite punchy crime fiction with strong female characters. I mean, if I was going to try and write historical romances or domestic dramas or something else, I don't think it would work. You've got a certain set of skills as a writer, and you sort of need to lean into them, I think, rather than trying to sort of fit a square hole into a round box. I just think I messed that metaphor up. A square hole into a round box. That doesn't make sense, but you know what I mean.
Square peg in a round hole.
That's the one.
I knew what you meant.
I'm better at writing than talking. Yeah.
Okay, so Simon, you mentioned that you're working on something else. So I hear that there's books 2 and 3 in the pipeline. Does that mean that we're going to see more of Zoe and Harry?
Yes, it is. There's book 2 was picked up by Text Publishing probably a month before the publication of the first book, which was gratifying, which was really nice. So I'm working on that right now, and book 3 is sort of in the works as well, but that's more in the box on the side at the moment. But yeah, I'm writing book 2 right as we speak.
Simon, if there was one thing that you would like readers to take away from this novel, what would it be?
The book really looks at, it covers themes around resilience and loyalty and the after effects of bullying, especially. I'd like people to, firstly enjoy the book and really tell all their friends. That'd be great. Really to in the end, really be desperately wanting the next book to come out. That'd be the aim. I have that with certain authors where they're desperately waiting and waiting and waiting as the years tick over for the next book to come out. We've got a plan to put out the next in this series within a year, so it'll be sort of August 2022, all things being well. So yeah, hopefully people just enjoy it, and that's really all I can ask for, really.
Simon, if the readers or listeners wanted to get in contact with you or make contact with you, how can they do that?
I've got a website which is simonrowell.net, or I've got they can just sort of search for me on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or wherever.
Simon, congratulations on the release of this fantastic novel. I highly recommend it. I wish you every success with it, and thank you for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage, claudineteinellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.